I'd like to introduce today's panelists. First, we have Chris Faraglia. Chris is a solution architect and testing advocate for TestRail. He has 15 years of enterprise software development, integration, and testing experience that spans domains of nuclear power generation and healthcare IT. His specific areas of interest include test management, quality assurance within regulated industries, test data management, and automation integrations. And then we're also joined by Conor Wolford. Conor is the chief of staff for three of Idera's other brands, Ranarix, Kiowan, and PreEmptive. His background is in solutions consulting, account management, and partner management for testing tools. He's currently based in Richmond, Virginia, in the United States, and enjoys music, reading, and spending time with his abnormally large yellow lab named Cooper. And then last but not least, we're also joined by Simon Knight, who is a lead product manager for Idera. He's also a dedicated husband and father of three teenage daughters. He's also an avid mountain biker and gamer, and he balances family life with his passion for improving software testing. So you can connect with Simon on Twitter, LinkedIn, Substack, or via his blog, and his blog is sjpknight.com. So now let's talk through a little bit on how today's webinar came to be. So every year, TestRail runs a survey among our users, and thousands of users respond to this survey. And we then take a culmination of those responses, and we're now in our third year of developing this software testing and quality report. And we'll actually be releasing the report today, and you all joining the webinar today will be the first to receive it. So everyone that has registered will get a link to the report in the follow-up email, and there's also a link in this slide deck. But from this year's survey that has turned into the software testing quality report, we did find a few key takeaways we've learned. So from this year's report, one thing we've noticed is that adoption trend to be more evolutionary rather than revolutionary. And the next point is really nothing too surprising, but there is a continuing investment in automation and tooling. We then also asked about collaboration. We found that within organizations, there's a lot of collaboration happening internally as well as with external folks. And finally, we really learned that teams are preparing and how they're preparing for the future and how to figure out how to use some of these new trends like AI. And all of these points we'll be tackling toward throughout today's discussion. So with that brief introduction, we're going to go ahead and start moving on to today's discussion with our panelists. So one of the first questions we asked about to our users was if their team is using any of the following development methodologies or techniques today. Every year, there seems to be a really big push to adopt a new trend in software testing, whether that's a methodology like Agile, Scrum, CI/CD, or something like API web services or shift left techniques. So one might expect to see a significant difference in how teams operate year over year, given the hype around various trends. But data from survey respondents year over year says otherwise. So the questions I have for today's panelists for discussion are, in practice, how are teams actually integrating these trends into their workflows, and how are they really making big moves with their processes and tech stack?
Yeah, so I'll jump in with this one, Heather. Thank you very much for the introductions and lead in and for this question. Initially, my response to this question was to kind of put my tester hat on and be a little bit skeptical around whether or not there's really a big push to adopt these trends. Or whether, it's just kind of fake news and kind of content being generated on the interwebs for content's sake. So, there's that kind of angle to it. Are they real? Is there really a big push to actually adopt these new trends? Are they in fact new? And on the assumption that they are real, who exactly is pushing for them? I think certainly on the part of the tech audience, many of whom may be on this this webinar today, there's likely, you know, justifiable skepticism, since a lot of this this push to adopt new trends, new systems, new processes can often be perceived as being, you know, pushed by tool and services vendors who have, you know, more of an interest in selling the latest tools and technology than perhaps they really do in improving the organization or the teams or the individuals. I think in terms of implementing new trends and new practices, there's always context to consider. How well the new improved process will actually work within the team or the organization in question, taking into account the current constraints, how much risk, how much cost, how much effort is associated with it, what the return on investment will actually be, how long it's going to take to implement those kinds of questions. With larger, sort of more risk averse organizations, there's inevitably going to be a kind of wait and see how well the process is actually working for others kind of attitude before they invest in any changes themselves. Smaller, more agile, sort of self-managing teams are much more likely to experiment with new practices and processes, in my experience. And just to kind of finish up, I think the core value propositions of software testing, you know, continue to remain somewhat static, answering the questions of have we built the right thing, and did we build it right? Those are always the key questions that testers are trying to answer, I think. And tooling and trends for testing, you know, tend to follow the practices, the processes and principles of development that have been used to accomplish, you know, whatever task is at hand. I think as AI, machine learning type solutions start to become more prevalent, then we'll definitely start to see new approaches related to those, and almost certainly new test related tooling to accommodate for them.
Just to add to what Simon mentioned about organizational size and the appetite for change, specifically for new technologies, and I think in my role specifically for TestRail, for both our current customers and a lot of our new onboarding customers at various kind of stages on their quality and software development kind of maturity model, one of the common things I see is really focusing on more incremental improvements with high focus on operational efficiency and not losing these operational kind of standards of, you know, how often are we shipping, hitting monthly release targets, minimizing hot fixes. Very operationally focused targets are still really more top of mind rather than making large shifts toward new tooling, taking new approaches, dramatically changing the methodology and how the team's going to execute and as it relates to software quality and testing. I think mainly teams will take bite-sized kind of pieces, if you will, to test the water and see how it's impacting the team, make small adjustments. But again, maintaining a high focus for like their operational targets is really a common theme that I see when I work with a lot of our new customers and existing ones from a TestRail perspective. And then the other thing, just relating to that, I'm coming back to what Simon mentioned for larger and small, large versus smaller organizations. Tighter timelines and release demands, I think, really actually impact everybody. I think it's harder for smaller teams because of resources. I think for larger organizations, they're under the same pressures and change can happen even slower. You have more people to push adoption through, and it becomes even a harder ask to make large shifts. And then really just the last thing, and I'll turn it over to Conor, I'm curious for your insight, is just overall the appetite for risk. And I think whether, you know, again, bigger organizations, I see the appetite for risk is dramatically lower, meaning, you know, the big shift to take on the new tool, the methodology, you know, I'm sure we'll talk more about AI today. That's a good example. And how much are we going to pivot and really go all in on, versus again keeping that operational focus to push out software to cadence where we have dependent customers and releases and criticality for various domains. It even makes it worse. So that's just kind of my take on it. I'll kind of turn it over to Conor to see where you kind of stack up on that. But
Yeah, and
Yeah,
Conor, we have about 30 seconds before we have to jump over to the next question.
makes sense. Yeah, and I was just going to quickly add there. I think one thing on how we can achieve that incremental approach that Chris mentioned really is what I've seen really work at organizations is identifying a champion group of people or projects where we can get some quick wins with whatever we're trying to implement, while also seeing some high ROI. And in the spirit of really achieving and making sure we're maintaining operational efficiencies, as Chris said, one way to really do that is to make sure when we select these champions and these champion projects to initially roll these methodologies or what have you out to them is document everything, document the results, try to make everything quantifiable in terms of efficiency savings. I'm sure there'll be some qualitative benefits as well, but the more that we can document, the more we can show to others, other groups, other projects, stakeholders that, hey, what we're implementing is really working. We've started small. Now we can start to roll this out because we've proven that this really can work. So I've seen that really work as
Perfect.
well.
Perfect. Chris, you had mentioned tighter timelines and release cadences, and that really is kind of a good segue into our next discussion points here, because we know that testing teams are always challenged to be more efficient and deliver results faster. And from this year's survey, we found that the majority of teams are releasing monthly or even faster. But many organizations do prioritize development speed above all else. So they're aiming to ship as fast as they can build. But for the panelists, is this really the right thing to prioritize? Or, which I think we all kind of know it's not, but is there some sort of compromise that we can meet here?
Yeah, I'll start off with this question. So the theme of my reaction to it is balance, right? Anecdotally, I've worked with a lot of organizations where let's say they're taking on a new project, they've dedicated a lot of internal resources to it. They might be dedicating external resources through consultants or contractors to help with it. And stakeholders have really pushed aggressive timelines and said, we need to get this out ASAP. Let's speed up the testing and development process to prioritize speed. What that has led to, what I've seen is significant bugs sometimes, unfortunately, being discovered too late in the process, let's say in UAT or systems integration testing, where they get a lot more expensive to address. We're shipping poor quality software, et cetera, right? The proper tools weren't brought in from the get-go. We didn't have realistic expectations, and now we're backtracking a bit. I say all of that tying it back to this idea of balance, where I really think that there is a line to how much you can really push on developing and shipping faster. If you cross that line in the wrong direction, your costs can actually go up. So we need to be careful there. And I think balances can be found during the planning phases through thorough investigation, research, and resource allocation. And in terms of finding that sweet spot, right? Sometimes people are way over here where we might be testing too much. There's redundant tests that's leading to wasteful repetition and our costs are going up. On the other side of that spectrum and that line, right, we might be testing too little. There's gaps in coverage leading to defects slipping through, driving costs up. So somewhere in the middle there's a sweet spot where we can get an appropriate amount of testing to still release at a faster rate while still making sure we're prioritizing quality and testing from the get-go. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Whether it's the right thing or not to prioritize speed above all other considerations is, somewhat dependent again on context. I mean, I talked a little bit about context in my previous response as well. If you're working on a product that is less safety critical, for example, a social media site or something like that, then speed's going to be the right call. Clearly, in a situation where you're working on something that is safety critical or that stores otherwise sensitive information, for example, medical device software or something like that, we'd expect to see a slower pace of software delivery. in order to accommodate for the more sort of critical needs on which that product is focused. Typically, in my experience, I think teams that are prioritizing speed above all else are relying on robust and largely automated testing to underpin the speed of delivery as well.
Conor and Simon both touch on some really, I think, key points. And really, for me to bring it all together, one of the things I focus on specifically around release cadence, and again, I think it was already mentioned, the focus on metrics to drive our decisions, or this idea that, again, working with our TestRail customers, and a lot of, questions I get are how do we gauge some of this confidence for release cadence? How soon do we want to release versus quality versus speed? And again, it depends on the industry. I think Simon mentioned it perfectly. It's, criticality of the software and risk. One of the things I'd like to look at when I'm asked this a lot of times is specifically looking at some focus metrics for release quality. So for instance, what is our current rate of hot fixes? What type of user feedback are we getting? If users are not satisfied, maybe we're missing the mark on features, moving a little too quickly, or not getting a good feedback loop. Real-time performance monitoring in production. So if we're, things are not looking good, maybe like actual speed performance, we're releasing very rapidly, but the application or whatever we're putting into a production state is not scaling well. And maybe we're not doing the due diligence of performance level testing, or not using the right tooling. So all these type of things I feel like kind of come together to input release cadence in addition to like business requirements. And then just the last thing I can think of, and again, it relates to both tooling and risk, is what test strategy is being implemented, and how are we communicating risk using that strategy for both decisions and tooling. It's the concept that I think I've mentioned on previous webinars, this whole idea of test exit summary, where how are we communicating risk at a given release, and how is that inputting us for our thought process on future releases? Our last 3 were very high. Here's our breakdown in our test exit summary. Maybe we're changing our tooling, or we need to make some tooling adjustments, development changes, team changes, adding resources. So I think all these things come together to formulate our release cadence and decisions on how frequently we release. And it's going to be different for every team. So kind of my thoughts, pulling everything together on that.
Right. And I think that makes a lot of sense when we talk about, especially speaking of tooling, that kind of leads us into our next topic here, and diverse tooling, because each year we do see from the survey that organizations are using really diverse sets of tools, whether it's CI/CD, requirements tracking, what have you. But it sounds like as more and more tools get added to the testing tech stack, team roles and responsibilities can sometimes become siloed or disjointed. So I guess, what are some of the common challenges you all see resulting from this lack of cohesion? And is there a way that teams can start addressing these issues?
The main issue you're gonna see from a lack of team cohesion tends to be like bugs escaping into production, right? So ultimately a poor quality kind of end result or outcome for the end user, the customer. Quite often a lack of cohesion often manifests itself as like a lack of visibility of into what other people are working on, and maybe changes being applied to code without the desired level of quality related oversight, or testing, in other words. So a lack of testing coverage, or an inappropriate level of testing being carried out as a result of the left hand not knowing what the right hand's doing in that sort of situation. There's been a big push over the last several years for smaller QA teams. I think that's largely stemmed from trends like sort of shift left, where we've sought to kind of push testing more towards the earlier stages of the development life cycle, and to give responsibility to developers for those things accordingly. I think that's fine. But there's still a need for like an overarching test strategy, a kind of big picture perspective of what all of the testing pieces need to look like, what the whole jigsaw kind of looks like when it's all put together. And in my experience, that's not a task that developers have typically taken a huge amount of interest in. And there's often still a need for somebody on the QA side to kind of oversee all of that stuff. Information radiation is a good kind of principle to think about when trying to solve this issue of making sure that the right information gets to the right people at the right time. So, you know, in an office environment, whiteboards can be quite good for that, sort of Kanban boards and stuff like that. But as you know, as we've seen more teams working remotely, you know, that kind of solution obviously doesn't scale particularly well. So, you know, tools like Jira and TestRail can obviously help to act as repositories, workflow coordinators, and help to sort of radiate that information outwards in terms of what's being designed, what's being executed, and what the results of all those things are.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in there. Thanks, Simon. Just to really build upon it, I agree with what you said. The challenges that I've seen, and you know, this leads up to, you know, as of most recently to talking with teams, it's kind of an ongoing challenge that I hear every now and then, where teams are just speaking different languages when it comes to tools. There's so many tools out there that teams are experiencing duplicate work at the end of the day. They're unclear sometimes of who is doing what. And what that leads to, what I hear is that it can lead to, you know, disconnects when it comes to the requirements that are being written, tests that are being created and run, the results that are being viewed. All of this is stored in difficult places, and that makes it hard to align on strategy and execution ultimately. And it can also lead to what I've seen is like this lack of accountability and insight into deliverables ultimately, as work has been completed and stored in different places. So those are the challenges that I see as well, kind of echoing what you've seen. And I agree, a lot of times in order to address these challenges, it's not necessarily something that a developer will do. And sometimes what I've seen is it really takes more of a centralized or even top-down approach to really get to the crux of these issues and do something about it. I've seen, you know, testing centers of excellence put into place where it's a centralized group who are really kind of auditing and vetting through what are the key tools that we need, what are our best practices and approaches, and propagating that information outward from there, working with teams as those champions. So I've seen that those types of initiatives happening these days because there are so many tools out there, and we really need to, one, hone in on what are the critical tools there that are really going to provide value to our teams at the end of the day. And there are so many tools available these days that it can be difficult to do that. So I've seen teams even more recently really starting to take those initiatives, even if it means some upfront investment to perform those internal analyses, because at the end of the day, we want to carefully select tools and approaches that are offering quantifiable value, hopefully. They're offering efficient integrations across the tool sets. And again, even if it means kind of putting some work in upfront to evaluate what is really critical and providing us value and what isn't anymore. So wanted to just add to your thoughts there. Chris, I don't know if you had anything else to share.
Yeah, I think you both covered it really well. I guess the really 2 points that I was thinking of for this kind of topic, and I'm looking at obviously the different bubbles for all the different tooling. I think one of the things that, again, that I've seen in, you know, working with a lot of from the TestRail side and just my industry exposure, you know, we're adding more and more tools. Like that is definitely a thing. You know, I think one of the misconceptions people have, and I've said this before, this is like one of my kind of sayings I've always mentioned to people building new infrastructure or trying to scale automation, is really that, you know, process can really be a tool. So we add process can be a tool along the way to help, you know, achieve goals and ensure and improve software quality. But really, tools are not a process. I hear a lot of teams, you know, I'm staring at the big bubble on this slide, and you know, what does your QA process look like? Will we use Selenium? It's not really a process. It's one of the tools that makes up a process. So how they're building that, I think there's a lot more misconception. And then the other thing is just lack of centralization across the board. Is, you know, the more tools we add, the less cohesive and these results become. You know, we're at the end of a build cycle. We have, you know, load testing tools, UI, API automation, maybe some security, all different type disaster recovery scripts or ways to do all these different things. How do we aggregate that to show total view quality? So I feel like that becomes more and more of a challenge the more tools we add. And then the last thing really is are the skills to be able to leverage and utilize the tools correctly, right? The whole idea of QA roles and what is the QA or tester focused role is like ever changing. And the more complex tools we have, the more that responsibility grows. And I think the need for upskilling something that organizations like Conor mentioned around TCOE or centers of excellence trying to build more of that centralized skill set to ramp up to the demands of both aggregating and maximizing all these different tools. So yeah, I think we covered a lot of good topics here that are very relevant.
Completely agree. And actually, our next topic is on collaboration. So we talk about upskilling, TCOEs, you know, and one thing we wanted to learn a little bit more about with our users is how many of them are working with external parties. And we found that about 61% of our respondents said that their organizations are working with either contractors, consultants, or some other type of third party in some fashion to tackle testing activities. And I think Chris, you kind of alluded to this, but why are so many organizations augmenting resources with external parties specifically? And do you think there are specific skill sets or gaps that these resources are filling?
Yeah, I'll just kind of keep my thought track going, Heather.
Sure.
So yeah, related to tools, and I think so I kind of just mentioned it with the last kind of topic and slide. But one of the things I really feel like is happening, I mean, I feel it myself around tools and upskilling is the breadth of tooling and exposure that the QA tester, quality engineer, you can tell by all these titles, they're changing and really requiring more of a breadth of experience for test focused roles. You know, I can think of a couple just off the top of my head. I mean, one of the big things, and again, some of the webinar content, we've mentioned some of this year, is around disaster recovery, right? Like traditionally, disaster recovery and the validation of disaster recovery and failover in regulated industries, right? That was one of our webinar topics. That is traditionally something that would fall within site reliability engineering or some type of related role with that. But QA and the test focus role are now overlapping validation of these type of recovery type activities, the actual validation of it. Performance and load testing. I mean, that's another role that I think that is ever increasing where we have stories or pieces of functionality in an agile environment where we are not load testing as part of a waterfall model. We're doing it iteratively or even in a build pipeline. So understanding concepts of benchmarking, performance testing, load and stress testing. So, you know, we have to be performance engineers. And then one of the last ones here, and again, I think I mentioned the last question as well, is around security, right? So, you know, security is something that, again, is not just meant for, you know, SOC 2 compliance or our security team. Security is transitioning to really everybody's responsibility in a development team of checking and validation of user authentication. How do we do functional testing with a focus towards security, aspects of security validation? So all in building these things into automation, right? How can we do automated testing in certain areas of validation of security? Could be in a UI. Very commonly, you know, for those that use OAuth, these are things we can validate at an API level. So I think the knowledge and the requirements of QA or test focused roles is just continuing to get broader and broader, and it's putting a lot more demands on teams to both upskill and find resources that can adapt and meet these. So I'm curious what Simon and Conor have to say. That's a lot to talk about specific to the roles.
Yeah, I mean, certainly from my experience, I mean, I worked myself as a kind of contractor and consultant, you know, kind of subject matter expert for a decent period of time in the software testing space. I think, you know, there's always going to be organizations that are willing to pay a premium, and individuals like myself who are willing to accept that premium, to come in and provide them with expertise in specific areas. So I think, you know, Chris obviously mentioned some of those areas. Performance testing has often been a big one. You know, things like security, disaster recovery, areas that require a somewhat specific tool set or set of skills, and knowledge and experiences that can be brought to bear to sort of test and think creatively about specific scenarios or situations that an organization may be facing with their testing. Those skills, that knowledge isn't always readily available within your organization. So, you know, sometimes you've got to look outside, sometimes you've got to collaborate with specialists in order to fulfill those functions. So yeah, I mean, I think it's natural that we would see this currently, and I imagine we'll still continue to see this into the future as well.
Yeah, just building upon that real quick, some of the two main reasons that I see as well. I think these days a lot of moving to external parties sometimes to assist with work. I think it has a lot to do with cost savings. You know, I think we saw a pretty big contraction in the market last year, and organizations are always looking for new ways to save monies, and sometimes this is one route to achieve that. So some organizations are still looking outward to do that as long as it still makes sense, you know, to deliver the same quality of work. The other reason that I see kind of along similar lines as the group's been talking about here is a lot of organizations these days are just going through massive projects and transformations. They might be moving to cloud-based platforms from legacy systems, modernizing systems, centralizing teams, you know, wanting to leverage AI. All of these massive projects going on, and sometimes consultants and contractors can come in to help define a strategy based on their expertise, as Simon was saying, you know, fill in resource gaps and skills gaps, especially if we're kind of working on a very specialized cutting edge project. And then resources as well can execute that strategy and provide help to internal resources and stakeholders. So, and sometimes, you know, after those projects are over, they might stick around to help and continue the ongoing work with maintaining whatever they've implemented, or they might back out and then hand the reins back over to internal teams. So those are some of the main reasons that I've been seeing recently to perhaps look outward. And, you know, a lot of that also just, as Simon was saying, you know, and Chris, revolves around filling in, you know, skill gaps and specialties as well. A lot of times external organizations can really help with that if it's not already found internally.
All right, so we're going to move on to, I think, our last discussion question then. I think it's fairly clear at this point that AI and testing is a pretty hot topic, and there's a lot of hype around it. And almost half of our survey respondents told us that they are incorporating AI into their testing processes. So I guess in your opinions, what are the most fruitful opportunities for AI in QA? Like, what are some of the challenges that organizations might face as they're considering adoption? And how do you think teams can begin addressing these to achieve truly meaningful AI integration?
Yeah, thanks, Heather. I'll kick off this one. It's a fun topic for everyone these days, right? So, in my opinion, what are some of the most fruitful opportunities here for AI and QA? I think it's an exciting time in general, of course. And I think leveraging AI can really be beneficial in QA. You know, my thought is in helping to define what to test and how to test it. I think there's a huge opportunity there for the market to grasp that in terms of, let's say, defining test parameters, test cases, scripts, et cetera, based off of requirements or user stories that might have been manually created or created by humans. I think, you know, leveraging AI to then produce outputs based off those requirements for testing. I think there's a huge opportunity there, as well as leveraging AI to ideally create a feedback loop throughout your pipeline. So perhaps using AI to report back on test runs or providing much more data-driven insights and using those insights to approve perhaps the original tests that were created based on execution reports and whatnot. I think there's a big opportunity there to just make us smarter, make us more efficient and better at our jobs at the end of the day to provide more value. I think leveraging AI in that way for all of us could be really beneficial. In terms of challenges, though, I think there are going to be quite a few. Namely, one of the main ones that sticks out in my head is us as humans still kind of having the ability to maintain and develop our domain expertise to know when to trust the AI's output or correct and refine it. I believe right now that there's still going to be that human intervention, right? For us to be able to step in with our critical thinking skills, our domain expertise, to really leverage AI to assist us with that and to develop, smarter and more efficient outputs for us in testing. I think at the end of the day, again, it's meant to do that and not to replace all of that work. And we need to maintain our domain knowledge and our expertise to be able to leverage these tools in the right way. So being able to maintain that and not get, let's say, too lazy or trust the AI too much, I think that could be a challenge, because you could imagine scenarios where we might trust it too much and lose our domain expertise and rely heavily too much on tools. And that could lead to defects slipping through and us not knowing precisely how to address them, which delays timelines and things like that. So I think no matter how much we incorporate AI into our processes, there will always be this need for human analysis, critical thinking, understanding of the domain and requirements to create, and maintain a checks and balances with these tools. But at the end of the day, I think it's an exciting time. There's a lot of opportunity there to really enhance our work, make our lives better and more efficient, and allow us to provide more value to our teams. So that's my thoughts on this matter here. Simon or Chris, I'd be interested in your thoughts, of course.
Yeah, I'll jump in and just riff a little bit off of some of your thoughts, Conor, and hopefully Chris can kind of wrap everything together at the end. I mean, one of the things that you mentioned, Conor, that really struck me was that whole sort of issue of like trust. So trusting the AI or large language model or the machine learning model or whatever it is, whatever the specific model is that you're using, being able to kind of trust the output that it's providing you is kind of a key consideration. And with sort of large language models, you can get by for the most part with the output that it's providing you with, so long as you're not relying on it again for anything like safety critical, right? As soon as there's a high degree of risk associated with whatever you're using that AI output for, then clearly trust is going to become a much greater consideration. And I'm not exactly sure how to address that issue currently. I think it's something certainly on the TestRail side that we're still kind of exploring and grappling with and trying to figure out how we can support our customers with that issue of really having a high degree of trust in the AI output. But that's certainly, I think, something that we see as an opportunity where we can add value for our customers and help them to try and address that question within their team, their organization, within the context of whatever it is that they're trying to deliver in an AI-enabled fashion. I think the other concern that we hear about, certainly from customers that I've spoken to recently, is the question of input as well. So, I've mentioned AI output. The other side of the coin is what you're actually putting into those models in the first place, and whether or not you have sufficient trust that data you're putting into the AI is going somewhere safe, dealing with questions of sort of intellectual property. How comfortable do you feel with putting, for example, snippets of your production code into an AI so that it can, verify or make suggestions based on what you've put into it. Data and intellectual property security, I think, is a big concern. And that again is something that we'd be seeking to address, and make sure we have a high degree of confidence in any AI implementation in TestRail. I think somebody asked, well, there's probably been a couple of questions in the chat around AI. We are, definitely thinking about it. We're working on implementing AI in TestRail, but we want to make sure that we've addressed those questions of, can you put data into the AI safely? Can you trust what you get out of it? We want to make sure that we've addressed those questions in a robust fashion before we get a solution out to customers, so that both we and you can have confidence in it.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just kind of round it out. For me, again, like I have a lot of background in my focus for just not only TestRail customers, but a lot of the industry work I've done in regulated industries. And that hits home, in my opinion, with both compliance, data integrity, data security, and really validation of the output of what it's telling us. So, it's not, again, like just Simon mentioned, it's not just what we're putting in, but also it's the level of trust that's coming out and how much of a human, factor do we have to give results. Or on the generative side, if we're generating test cases to cover a feature or traceability, how much are we actually getting versus how much do we have to put in to make it complete? If we were to do testing analysis and build test cases manually versus something on the generative side coming from AI where it'll create it for us, how much input do we have to put there to ensure that it's covering everything that we want, but it's also taking the right domain approach for the data that we're passing into the model to get the highest amount of value and also maintain compliance. That's a big thing. Non-functional requirements and more compliance-focused aspects outside of functional testing, I think, I'm not going to say they're problematic, but I think it's something we need to pay attention to. And I think the other side where I go is more of, if you want to think of it as a fruitful or higher value area that I'm interested in personally, and I'm not implying we're doing all or some of this or any of this for around TestRail, like Simon mentioned, separate topic, and we're doing our own investigation and planning around our own direction. I think this is a general statement for me is on the predictive analytics side and more reporting for getting insights and trends for areas on what you're doing with your testing to then maximize your own manual inputs or efforts for manual testing, even automation development in areas like flaky test identification, remediation. What tests do I have in my suite? Do I know, or areas in the application related to tests are more apt to be flaky or inconsistent or non-deterministic based on the amount of data in the test runs that I've done over time? Like those type of things provide a lot of high value, but I think really in the end of it, it's really going to be on the end users to identify what fits best as we progress. So a lot left to be determined, but
Agreed.
exciting nevertheless.
Yes. Let's go ahead and jump into some of your questions. There are a lot in here. Unfortunately, we will not be able to get to all of them, but we'll try to tackle a handful. So one of the, I guess, bigger questions that I saw in here is, can shift left become the future for all QA teams?
Maybe.
Is it, I guess maybe another way I'll try to phrase that is it a one size fits all solution? Because when we say all,
well, yeah, it's kind of a broad question. I think shift left will certainly suit some teams, maybe others not so much. Again, it always kind of comes down to context for me and the specific risks that you're trying to address. I think developers naturally want to deliver good code. They want to see their code shipped to production. So they're invested in the quality of that code, the same as your QA or your QE or testing teams, in exactly the same way. So developers are always going to carry out some level of test coverage. Exactly how much you want to shift testing coverage to the left towards the earlier stages of your development life cycle, is going to depend on the specific makeup of your team, what it is you're trying to deliver, and the risks that you're trying to address with your testing. There's no like one size fits all solution, in my opinion, as Heather mentioned at the start, I think.
Right. And then we'll jump to next question here. So someone had mentioned that their company's TestRail suite was pretty much the biggest internal knowledge resource for onboarding as an asset, and they said thank you. But so they were experiencing deprecated docs and Confluence pages that were a huge pitfall that they would run into when they were trying to learn how their app works, roles, and their user stories. And they're wondering if any of the panelists have any advice or perspective on methods for implementing easily maintainable and updatable internal or public documentation that integrates into CI/CD flow, test cases, or Jira tickets, or if they could leverage automation or AI for composition. I know that was a bit of a long one in here. I will.
But no, I think it's a great question. A lot of areas there. So I just reference two things, especially whenever we come down to organizations or domains that are high compliance, or we're looking at audit adherence. So for requirements standpoint, I think a single source of auditable kind of truth, which a lot of people that use both TestRail and just in general use Jira, maintaining a single source of truth that is something that is recoverable and that you can show very clear change history on is really critical. So again, Jira, we have deep Jira integrations for TestRail. A lot of people use it. I think as of 2023, Jira maintains or is now has the ability to store PHI or patient health information for US HIPAA regulatory compliance. So Jira is a pretty good option from my opinion. There's other ones out there, but embedding your actual requirements in a revision and history track tool. And then the other half is deeply linking this with your test requirements, whether they're automated or manual. And just because I'm familiar, obviously, with TestRail, you can easily link Jira stories, issues, epics into milestones and test cases and really achieve full linkage within your SDLC. So, if you're using Confluence pages or wikis or docs and different things, those may be okay for some use cases, but defining what your software development requirement artifact's going to be, in this case, maybe a Jira story, Jira epics with stories, tasks, and then having a general process, standard process to link them with your other SDLC tests and artifacts. It's really going to put you in the best position to maintain that level of traceability and compliance. So there's probably a lot more, but hopefully that helps.
That does. Thank you for that. And let me go ahead and we might have time for one, maybe two more questions. All right. And then our next question is, will TestRail be considering itself to become a one for all things QA and solution? For example, requirement documentation and tracking, bug tracking, test automation, CI/CD pipelines, etc. And Simon, I believe you marked that you wanted to answer this one.
Yeah, I can answer that very quickly. Yes. Next question. Yeah, I mean, we're viewing ourselves conceptually as quality operating system, right? That's what we want to become. We want to be the hub for all things testing. I think it's going to take a little while for us to build out the product in several sort of key areas in order to accommodate for some of those things. TestRail's already got quite robust integration. So we've got the CLI tool that can be used to quickly and easily sort of spin up automated testing integrations. We've got a comprehensive API that can be used to develop more bespoke integrations. We've got the kind of webhooks capability. We've got the requirements and defects integration. So we have a lot of the pieces already in place. I think, as I've mentioned elsewhere in the Q&A, a big focus for us this year is sort of reporting and analytics, and really kind of building out and deepening the existing integration with Jira to make things like requirements traceability, creating test coverage based on the information that you have in Jira or that we're able to pull from Jira for you more easily. So those are big focuses for us this year, and we're going to continue down that path of becoming all things testing.
Beautiful. I'm excited for that future. And that being said, with 1 minute left, I'm just going to wrap us up very quickly. I won't read through this whole slide, but there is a link at the top to download the report that we were referencing and pulling this data from and asking questions about. And you'll find some other resources on here as well that you're more than welcome to peruse through at your leisure. And that being said, I want to give a huge thank you to Simon, Conor, and Chris for sharing their experience and knowledge with us today. An hour is not a long time, and we'd love to get through more information. I know where we are going to be holding another panel style webinar in about a month or so, so stay tuned for more information on that. But otherwise, to the audience, thank you all so much for joining us and your great questions. And I apologize that we couldn't get to all of them. But that being said, I hope everyone has a wonderful remainder of their Tuesday.